Do we need to be free in order to be morally responsible? Let's consider. Hello, philosophers. I'm Chico. Welcome to the Philosopher Show, where we consider the greatest questions of human history. Imagine two people commit the exact same crime, say, stealing a car. Now, one of them could have chosen not to do so, could have chosen not to steal it. The other one couldn't. Some quirk in the universe, for some reason, made it so that he didn't have the option to not steal it. Here's the strange question. Are they equally responsible? Now, a lot of people will say yes. Both of them chose to steal the car, even if one of them, like philosophers tell us, didn't have the option of not doing otherwise, didn't have the alternative of not doing otherwise. What if their intuition is right? What if it's the case that you don't need the alternative of doing otherwise in order to be morally responsible? Over the last couple of episodes, we've been looking at Frankfurt cases. Frankfurt challenges the principle of alternative possibilities, that in order to be free, you need to be able to have the option of doing otherwise. We saw the dilemma defense. In the last video, we saw the general abilities defense. Today, we'll look at a philosopher named John Martin Fischer, who's going to pull a radical move. He's going to say, stop arguing over the alternatives. Maybe incompatibilists are right, and you just don't have free will if you have determinism. Even so, maybe we could still have moral responsibility, and isn't that what we care about in the first place? Maybe moral responsibility and free will are two separate things. This is a concept called semi-compatibilism. Semi-compatibilism first holds that it may be the case that free will is not compatible with determinism. Determinism, remember, is the theory that whatever happens is determined to happen, has to happen the way that it does. And Fischer says, I'm agnostic about it. Maybe the incompatibilists are right. Incompatibilists say that free will and determinism are not compatible with each other. It's like, yeah, maybe that's the case. But, he'll argue, it is the case that moral responsibility is compatible with determinism. And that's unique. All the philosophies we've looked at so far have thought that moral responsibility and free will go hand in hand. But Fischer says that we don't really need to worry about free will. What we really are interested in is moral responsibility, and we can have that as long as we have sourcehood, as long as we are the source of our actions. So we'll start by distinguishing two types of control. First, there's regulative control. That is the ability to regulate your behavior, to do otherwise if you choose. This involves dual power, the power to perform the action and the power to refrain. And this is what the principle of alternative possibilities demands. Remember that said, in order to be free, we needed to have an alternative to what we actually did. And Fischer says, yeah, that might require indeterminism. You might not get regulative control with determinism. But there's a second kind of control, guidance control. The ability to guide your behavior via practical reasoning, your own practical reasoning. You don't need the power to do otherwise to have this kind of control. The only thing that you need in order to have this kind of control is that your actions flow from your own reasons-responsive mechanisms in the right way. And he says this is the only thing that moral responsibility requires. So it wouldn't be a free will discussion after Frankfurt without giving you some cases. So here's your first case here. Two different drivers, driver A and driver B. Driver A is driving to work, sees a pedestrian, swerves out of the way to avoid hitting him. She could have hit the pedestrian if she wanted to. She has regulative control, dual power to hit or not hit. Now, driver B. Driver B is in the exact same situation, but unbeknownst to driver B, the car's safety AI would have forced her to swerve out of the way even if she didn't want to, even if she chose to go after the pedestrian. Of course, she swerves on her own, the AI never kicks in, so it's never a problem. So she couldn't have hit the pedestrian. Her AI would have prevented it. Fischer's claim is that both drivers here are equally morally praiseworthy. Sure, driver B lacks regulative control. She couldn't have done otherwise, but she still has guidance control. She swerved for her own reasons through her own deliberation. And he says guidance control then is enough. So he says that guidance control requires that the agent's actions flow from a moderate reasons-responsive mechanism. But what does that mean? This, he and another philosopher, Ravizza, break down into two components. First, reasons receptivity, the cognitive side. The mechanism must be able to recognize reasons, to see that certain considerations count against acting. It must show a regular pattern of recognizing reasons across scenarios. It doesn't have to be perfect, but it can't be random or erratic. Then there is reasons reactivity, the volition side. The mechanism must be able to react to at least some of the reasons, by choosing differently. Now, Fischer requires only weak reactivity. There must be at least one possible scenario in which the agent recognizes a sufficient reason and responds to it by acting differently. Why moderate in that case? Well, if it were too strong, then that would mean that an agent would react given sufficient reasons in every single scenario. And that would mean that agents that have a weakness of will, let's say, that don't respond due to some kind of sufficient reason, that they would be not morally responsible. That doesn't seem right. It's like, imagine you just ate somebody else's birthday cake because you just lacked the fortitude to stop yourself from the temptation. You'd still be morally responsible, right? Even though you weren't going with your reasons in that case. But it also can't be too weak. That would be something like the agent responding to reasons in at least one possible scenario, but that's too permissive. Even an agent that was severely impaired could actually meet that criterion. So that's moderate on the receptivity side. You need to be able to see reasons consistently. But that's weak on the reactivity side. You can act on them in at least one possible scenario. And he believes that captures the right range of agents to call morally responsible. Okay, so let's consider another scenario. The kleptomaniac versus the ordinary thief. The kleptomaniac steals compulsively. When she sees something, she wants it. Her mechanism of action doesn't respond to reasons. She can't even refrain when she sees something and first of all says, I don't even really want that thing in the first place. But second of all, when she sees it and says, it would be wrong to take this, right? She's not responding to those kinds of reasons. Her mechanism is not moderately reasons responsive. She lacks guidance control and therefore is not morally responsible. Or at least you could say that her responsibility is diminished. Now consider the ordinary thief. He steals because he wants to, but he could respond to reasons. In fact, if a police officer were watching, he'd refrain. If the item weren't worth the risk, if he looks at it and says, I don't really want that, then he wouldn't do it. His mechanism is moderately reasons responsive. He has guidance control and therefore he is morally responsible. And that's even if in a deterministic world he couldn't have done otherwise. So we have an interesting contrast here because it definitely seems like there's something different between somebody who's got some kind of an addiction to doing it. I'm not sure exactly what kleptomania entails, but something that forces that person to do it and something that somebody does it just because they want to get that thing. But Fischer is building the case off of this ability to do otherwise, right? He's trying to ignore that ability to do otherwise. And we might wonder, is he losing something by dropping that from the considerations? Okay, there's one more piece to Fischer's account. It's not enough that the mechanisms be reasons responsive. It has to be the agent's own mechanism. And Fischer calls this mechanism ownership. The agent must take responsibility for the mechanism. She must see it as her own and recognize that she's the appropriate target of reactive attitudes like praise or blame based on how she employs it. Now, this is a subjective condition. It's about the agent's own self-understanding, and it's not about the causal history of the mechanism. So imagine a person that has been secretly brainwashed to act in a certain way. The brainwashing produces a reasons responsive mechanism. She responds to reasons normally, she deliberates, she acts for reasons she endorses. But she doesn't know she was brainwashed. She takes full ownership of her mechanism. She seizes it as her own and accepts responsibility for her actions. On Fischer's view, she has guidance control. She owns the mechanism, and the mechanism is reasons responsive. So she's morally responsible. This is exactly the issue that plagues mesh theories that we'll talk about in the next video. If someone engineers your reasons responsive mechanism, gives you values and dispositions and reasons responsiveness that you didn't choose, and you then take ownership of that, is it the case that you're morally responsible? Is it your fault? Are you the source of your actions in that case? For Fischer, it doesn't matter. The causal history of the mechanism is not important. What matters is the ownership. And maybe it's partially reasonable. We don't look at how you got your character when we evaluate your character. We just look at the character that you have, and if that's the source of your actions, then it's good if your character is good. But then imagine somebody that was just developed in a lab to do the wrong thing all the time. That person would be morally responsible for all of his actions, even though he was built to do bad things and to take ownership of that as well. And that might seem difficult to make sense out of. If somebody totally built you from scratch, then how are you the source of your actions? So for some philosophers, they look at that and they say, hey, somebody else built you, so there's no way you are the source of your actions. But probably the deepest objection to this theory comes from that idea that, can we really split free will and moral responsibility like Fischer's trying to do? Moral responsibility involves deserving praise or blame. But how could you deserve blame for something you couldn't have avoided? Even if your action flowed from your own reasons-responsive mechanism. The fact that you couldn't have done otherwise seems like it wasn't really up to you in the first place. Now, the response here is that this is exactly what Frankfurt was after, right? This is exactly the intuition that Frankfurt dealt with in his situations. So here, a lot rides on, was Frankfurt successful? And a lot of that rides on, was the dilemma argument successful? And if you don't remember any of that stuff, you could rewatch that video where I go over the dilemma defense and all that stuff. A third objection, could somebody really deserve, let's say, punishment if they couldn't have done otherwise? Fischer argues that guidance control is sufficient for the reactive attitudes, by which he means stuff like resentment, indignation, gratitude, things like that. If it's appropriate to feel resentful to somebody, it's appropriate to keep them morally responsible. And he says that guidance control makes these appropriate attitudes. But it might be claimed that these reactive attitudes and desert, whether you deserve something or not, might be two different things. You can feel resentful towards somebody even if they couldn't have helped what they did, but that doesn't mean they deserve the resentment. So philosophers that react in this way say that it seems like desert requires something stronger, something that was genuinely up to the person. They should have been able to choose differently. Without that, resentment might be natural, but it wouldn't necessarily be justified. So I think that for Fischer, his account captures an important truth. The way you act matters, not just whether you had alternatives. The ordinary thief does seem to be different than the kleptomaniac. But I'm not sure that guidance control is sufficient for the kind of moral responsibility we're after here. And in particular, desert. I think this is a pretty good response to Fischer. But let me know what you think. Can we separate moral responsibility from freedom? Now, Fischer says that you don't need the ability to do otherwise. You just need to act from the right kind of mechanism. But what if we turn the whole conversation on its head? What if, instead of asking if your mechanism is responsive to reasons, we ask if you, the agent, are an irreducible cause of your actions? What if you're not just a mechanism at all? We'll talk about that in the next video, so don't forget to stick around, hit that notification button, like, subscribe, and I will see you in that video. Adios.